I don't think I've ever played a football game that feels like it truly nails special teams play. Madden has been especially bad at this phase of football for a very long time, and has largely neglected it year in and year out. Every now and then, a release of Madden comes out that focuses on special teams, but the upgrade is never as comprehensive or robust as I feel like it should be. I was considering making a video about all of special teams, but that's actually far too big a topic to tackle in a single video, and I don't want to make another one of these that runs over 50 minutes like I did last time. So I decided that it would be best to make shorter videos that each focus on specific aspects of special teams play. While I was drafting the script for my previous video about pass blocking and pass rushing, I had started thinking about issues with blocking and rushing in special teams as well, and thought I'd do a video about one specific specialist position that has kind of been a personal crusade of mine for quite a few years now. I'll surely discuss more of Madden's special teams failings in future videos, but for today, I want to talk about how Madden completely fails to do justice to an oft overlooked and underappreciated specialist position, the long snapper. I want to look at the specific position of long snapper for two reasons. One, I played on special teams in high school, and so I worked alongside our long snapper, and he spent extra time before and after practices honing his skills. And two, I'm covering this topic because, unlike other highly specialized positions in football, like the holder or kickoff coverage gunners, Madden actually does include long snappers as a position in the depth chart, but has never included any mechanics or rules that actually make the long snapper a meaningful position on your team, or which differentiate who is a good long snapper compared to who is not. As for my high school teammates on special teams, there were several of us who never would have seen playing time if not for our special teams duties. Instead of resigning ourselves to life on the bench, as some other reserves had done, we carved out niches for ourselves so that we could see more playing time. We worked hard to earn our positions, and the coaches noticed that extra work, especially if it happened to be extracurricular in nature. And they rewarded us with extra rotational reps on both offense and defense in relief of tired starters. My experience has led me to respect special teamers, probably much more than most football fans do. Yet, in Madden, the long snapper isn't a highly specialized elite position. In fact, in Madden, it doesn't matter who you put in this position. Everybody plays it exactly the same. And this is completely disrespectful to all of the people who busted their butts to train at that specialist position at every level of football. I remember proposing a long snapping rating on a YouTube comment or a Madden forum like 6 or 7 years ago, and receiving absolutely vitriolic responses that largely boiled down to having the outcome of a game decided by a random fluke like a botched snap would be horrible game design. But you know what? It's a sentiment that does make a certain degree of sense. Determining the outcome of a match by a random die roll does seem like it would be bad video game design, at least outside of digital craps. But hold on a minute, is it really bad game design? Running backs have a rating that determines their likeliness to fumble. Fanboys are apparently okay with a running back randomly fumbling while trying to run out the clock and potentially becoming the GOAT of the game if the other team scores and wins. Quarterbacks have several ratings that determine the accuracy of passes. These same fanboys appear to be okay with the idea of a random bad pass deciding the outcome of a game. Receivers have several ratings that determine their likelihood to catch a pass. Fanboys seem okay with the receiver randomly dropping a pass and potentially losing the game for the team. And I can keep on going down the line. Linemen have ratings that determine if they whiff on a block. Defenders have ratings that determine the likelihood of missing tackles. Defensive backs have ratings that determine whether they blow a coverage. Kickers have ratings that determine if they miss a kick or simply can't kick the ball far enough to begin with. Heck, even coaches have ratings that determine how much players develop in the offseason or how likely free agents are to sign a contract. There's ratings that determine whether or not a player gets injured on any given play, whether he has the ball or not. And there's a random die roll that determines whether players slip and fall in rain or snow. And heck, I'm not even sure if there is a rating that determines how frequently that happens. Ratings, semi-randomly deciding the outcome of games, and in fact, entire seasons, is apparently okay for literally every other position, both on and off the field. But somehow, having a rating that determines if a snap or special teams hold is botched is suddenly a bridge too far? But to play devil's advocate and to be fair to the critics, yeah. If you're playing a 5 or 6 minute quarter pickup game online or an ultimate team, and each team is only getting between 3 and 5 possessions the entire game, then it does in fact make sense that you would not want your one and only attempt at a punt or field goal in the entire game to go awry because of a fluke like a botched snap. In such a shortened game, it would swing the game wildly in one direction or the other, with little to no time or opportunity for the victim team to overcome such an unfortunate outcome. See, what I tell you, even when talking about something as mundane and uncelebrated as long snapping, quarter length and game pace still create design problems. I keep saying, every episode of this series is probably going to refer back to that first episode about quarter length. Anyway, if Madden is supposed to be an authentic NFL experience, then botched snaps should be included in the game, because, like it or not, they are a part of football, albeit a pretty rare part. Games have and will be decided by a single botched snap. Narratives have been formed around entire careers based on one bad snap or one botched hold. Entire seasons have hung on the balance of a single special teams play. Even at the highest level of the NFL, snafus happen. Besides, the game already has different modes for competitive, arcade, and simulation experiences that supposedly affect how much stick skills affect the outcome of plays compared to player ratings. So if MUT and tournament players don't want botched snaps deciding the outcomes of individual plays or their entire matches, then fine. I'm fine with botched snaps being disabled by default in arcade and competitive game modes. But they sure as hell should be present in simulation mode. After all, if it's in the game, it's in the game. Right, EA? Yeah. Thankfully, the vitriolic opposition to the long snapper being a meaningful position in Madden has apparently cooled down in the intervening years since I first brought it up. I've even seen an increasing number of articles, forum comments, and even NFL teams and players on social media that have started supporting the idea of having more robust mechanics around long snappers, holders, and other special teams positions in Madden. So who knows? Maybe there will be some meaningful change in this department sometime soon. In fact, Madden has, for years now, included animations of quarterbacks having to reach or jump in order to receive a slightly off-target shotgun snap. I don't think I've ever seen a bad snap that actually goes over the QB's head and has to be chased down and treated as a fumble. And even if the QB does have to reach to catch an errant shotgun snap, it still doesn't seem to affect the outcome or timing of the rest of the play. As far as I can tell, it doesn't disrupt the handoff to the running back, nor does it slow down the QB's drop back and make it harder to hit a narrow window for something like a hitch or a slant route. As far as I can tell, these animations of bad snaps are entirely superficial and random. I don't think there are any ratings of a center or a long snapper that influence the frequency of these sorts of animations. As far as I know, they are completely random. And even though I've seen these slightly off-target snaps in shotgun offensive plays, I do not think I have ever, in my entire time playing Madden since the Sega Genesis, seen such an animation on a punt or a field goal long snap. I've only seen it on offensive shotgun plays. A few years ago, the YouTuber Ryan Moody made a video demonstrating how blocked field goals in Madden 18 required the kicker to pause slightly in his kicking animation in order to make time for the defender who jumped the snap to block the kick.
But let's take a very close look at what happens. I'm going to stop the ball here when it's at the holder's hand. Now, this is the blocked kick. Notice where the kicker is. This is the good kick that we had watched before. The ball's in the same position. Look at where the kicker is in his movement. The difference here, as we go back to the one that gets blocked, is the movement of the kicker. The kicker causes this to get blocked more than the defense. It's very, very subtle, but he does this slide backwards. This is what causes the kick to get blocked. I'm going to show it.
This is a concession that EA had to make in order to allow punts and field goals to even be able to be blocked to begin with. The kicker has to slightly freeze for a split second if the user gets a successful jump on the snap. Otherwise, the snap, hold, and kick animations all happen too fast to allow a defender to get into the backfield to block a kick. This is entirely determined by whether or not the defender's attempt to jump the snap is timed correctly. It has nothing to do with the long snapper, holder, or the kicker. This problem could potentially be fixed by having some slower animations that allow the defense to get the penetration necessary to block the kick. It could also be resolved by having a long snapper's rating determine how good the snap is. Having a skilled long snapper should result in faster, laser beam long snaps that hit the holder or punter right in the chest, shortening the time it takes for the kicker to kick the ball and reducing the likelihood of a defender having the time to get enough penetration into the backfield to tip or block the kick. Having a less skilled long snapper, on the other hand, could result in slower, floatier long snaps that take more time to get into the hands of the holder or punter. It could also result in the long snap being more likely to be off-center, forcing the holder or punter to have to reach or jump to corral the ball, which would then disrupt the normal kick timing and thus give the defense more time to potentially block the kick. Even worse long snappers would open up the additional possibility of long snaps being driven into the ground or sailing over the holder or punter's head, forcing a fire drill at best, or being picked up by the defense at worst. As a side note, it would also be nice if it were more possible to get pressure up the middle of the line instead of having to be a very specific edge rusher. Right now, kicks can normally only be blocked by specific edge rushers in a designated kick block play. Defensive tackles can't rip through the guard and tackle to get a hand on the ball, at least not normally. I actually did see a blocked punt up the middle happen once in Madden 21. It was the first time I ever remember seeing this in all of my decades of playing Madden. There were extenuating circumstances. It happened while the punter was forced to line up at a shallower depth due to the offense being backed up against their own end zone. I'm not sure if this is intended behavior by the designers, or if this was some kind of glitch that just happens to look like real football. See, that's one of the funny things with Madden. Even when it gives outcomes that look like dynamic, organic, realistic football, it's hard to tell if it was by design or if it's an unintended glitch that the developers would remove if they had known about it. Anyway, penetration up the middle wouldn't even necessarily have to result in an outright block. It would also be nice to have field goals and punts be able to be tipped by a rusher or tipped by a jumping defender at the line of scrimmage, instead of it being a completely binary state of either the kick is blocked or it's not. Having an otherwise accurate kick be tipped and miss the upright slightly should also be a risk, especially on longer field goals where the kicker has to angle it down in order to get greater distance. Having a viable risk of botching a long snap or a hold on special teams would also add an extra element of strategy to a franchise or dynasty mode, because it would force you to have to consider the long snapping position when you are building your team. Did you draft some promising skill players who you want to start right away? Well, you might not be able to keep them all on your active roster and still have room for a dedicated long snapper. Did you activate that speedy 69 overall rookie receiver as your 53rd man so that he can play out of the slot or on kick return duty at the risk of not having a dedicated long snapper and giving up the occasional botched snap on a field goal or punt? Or do you stash that receiver on your practice squad so that you can keep a dedicated long snapper to ensure that you'll actually be able to rely on getting off that 40-yard game-winning field goal when you need it? Maybe you lose a playoff game on a bad snap on what would have been a game-winning field goal because you didn't bother to invest in a dedicated long snapper. So maybe in the following offseason, you actually look to draft or to free agency or to the trade block for a player who can play as a dedicated long snapper. Or maybe you do have a good long snapper, but he's an aging veteran or his contract is going to be too expensive for you to renew when it expires in a year or two. Maybe you draft some mediocre lineman in the 6th or 7th round to add depth to your line, only to find out that he's a 45 overall offensive lineman. But before you cut him in the preseason, you might notice that he's actually a decent long snapper. Well, now you have another decision to make. Do you cut this player and risk not having a long snapper in a year or two? Or do you stash him on your practice squad for a year or two to develop him as a replacement for your veteran long snapper who won't be around forever? Or maybe you don't bother to keep a dedicated long snapper at all, and you just use a reserve center or tight end or whatever who has good but not great long snapper attributes. Maybe you do this because you prefer to stack your team with talent at the offensive and defensive skill positions, or you expect that your explosive offense won't have to settle for too many difficult field goals, so you don't need an elite long snapper. And you're willing to risk the possibility of an occasional special team snafu. Or maybe you have older veterans at multiple key skill positions who are more prone to injury, and you just need the extra depth in skill positions and can't afford to keep a dedicated long snapper on your roster. This is all cost-benefit analysis. Is the risk of a botched snap greater than the potential reward of keeping some other player for whatever reason? Right? These are the sorts of things that we want from our sports franchise and dynasty modes. We want the games to give us difficult off-field decisions like this to have to make year in and year out. Furthermore, if fatigue is designed so that it strongly affects long snapper performance and or their chance of injury.
And remember, and we should have said it, it's a new long snapper. Kondo never returned with the head injury. The new snapper is Travis Gaethel.
These backups do not get a lot of snaps. These backup long snappers, and your kicking game can go awry in a hurry without that timing.
It would also encourage teams to not use a starting lineman or tight end in that position, since he'd more likely be fatigued from having played the offensive drive and wouldn't perform as well in his long snapping duties. So again, he would have to be a dedicated specialist. So how exactly should a long snapper rating work? There's a few different ways that it could be implemented. The long snapper could just co-opt the existing throwing power and maybe the short throw accuracy rating that is used for QBs, but which every player in the game has a rating for anyway. Your offensive lineman with the best throw power and short accuracy would probably be your best long snapper. Alternatively, EA could add a whole new rating for long snapper, or heck, even break it up into long snap power and long snap accuracy. If EA adds more potential for pressure up the middle, then the risk of a kick being blocked by pressure up the middle would also force teams to have to balance the long snapping ability of the player against his blocking ability. You wouldn't be able to put a QB at the long snapper position simply because he has good throw ratings, because he'd be a shitty blocker who would allow pressure up the middle. You'd have to look at an actual lineman or a tight end or maybe even a fullback if you have one on your roster. Someone who is a competent blocker in addition to having a strong arm and some skill at long snapping. So a player's overall rating in the long snapper position would be most heavily determined by his long snapping rating, and his blocking ratings would be a runner-up factor in determining his overall rating. Some defensive ratings, such as tackle, pursuit, and, of course, speed, should also factor into a long snapper's rating, since he's effectively going to be playing defense on punts, and will be expected to potentially run down a returner and tackle him. But these defensive attributes should be much smaller factor in their overall rating.
The Vikings used one of their 4 7th-round draft choices on Air Force long snapper Austin Cutting. Cutting appeared in 23 games over 2 seasons at Air Force. Aside from the rare skill of long snapping and athleticism to get downfield to cover kicks, Cutting has a couple other traits worth pointing out.
A long snapping rating could also be used by regular centers to determine if pistol or shotgun snaps on offensive plays should occasionally go bad. The regular center should be competent at long snapping, but he doesn't necessarily specialize in it, so he should occasionally snap the ball into the ground or over the QB's head, especially in inclement weather conditions. You know, maybe like a long snapping rating in like the high 60s or 70s is good enough for a starting center, but for like an actual long snapper, maybe you want long snapping ratings in like the 80s and 90s. A botched pistol or shotgun snap should be rare, of course, but it should happen occasionally. Or maybe receiving the snap should be a rating for QBs and punters that determines if they pull a Rex Grossman. Bottom line is, bad snaps happen in football, they should happen in Madden too. If it's too much trouble to have a long snap, hold, or snap receiving rating for long snappers, holders, punters, and QBs, then I guess the old consistency trait could have been a good alternative candidate for what would determine whether a long snap is botched, or if the hold is botched, or if the holder, punter, or QB fumbles the snap. Or at least it would have been a good candidate if the consistency rating were still in the game. It disappeared sometime around 2015. By this point in the video, you might have expected to have seen some jarring, shoehorned-in promotion for something like Raid Shadow Legend or Skillshare or Curiosity Stream or Manscaped or some other sponsored product, but not in this channel. I don't do corporate sponsorships. I want the readers of my blog and the viewers of this channel to have faith that I'm saying what I mean and meaning what I say, and that I'm not just creating clickbait fluff pieces to shill corporate product or to chase algorithms to sell out to soulless corporate advertisers. All my content creation is done on my own free time and is funded through the generous contributions of readers and viewers like you through Patreon. If you enjoy this content and want to see more like it, then I encourage you to consider becoming a contributor and supporting the creation of my content. With just a dozen or so of you contributing even just $1 or $2 a month, I'll secure the licensing for the video editing software that I use to create quality content like this for the foreseeable future. Even if I were to suddenly and unexpectedly become unemployed, I'd still be able to continue creating content thanks to your contributions. And if I could get 50 to 100 of you to donate that same $1 or $2 a month, it would guarantee that I'd be able to keep my website domain and hosting going indefinitely. All patrons get regular updates and previews of projects that I'm working on. Patrons at higher tiers will also get early access to the finished projects, as well as access to the occasional poll of future content. At the time of this recording, I already have a preview outline of an exciting project that I'm creating about EA's NCAA football games. I may also add additional perks and benefits as my support base grows. Your support might also help improve the very games that I discuss on this channel. I honestly doubt that any of the corpo bigwigs at EA give a damn about what people like me have to say about Madden, even on the off chance that one of them does stumble across my content to begin with. But I also make critiques of the indie football games, which is, of course, done in the spirit of constructive criticism. I know that the developers of Axis Football have seen my content and have made updates to their game in direct response to feedback in my videos and to the feedback of others within the community. The people at Axis listen, and they care. Your support for creators within this community, including myself, among others, actually does have the potential to lead to better products in this market. Together, we can hopefully help create better football games. And, considering that Madden 22 is basically just copying Axis's homework, I guess maybe we kinda did help make Madden better too. Phew, well, now that the shameless self-promotion is out of the way, let's get back to talking about everybody's favorite position in all of football, the long snapper. I'm sure there's some of you who are still not sold on the idea of having outcomes of games determined by pseudo-random bad snaps, even if it is based on a player's ratings. If you've made it this far into the video, then first of all, thanks for keeping an open mind. And also, I'd like to propose the idea of maybe adding new mechanics associated with long snapping that convert the random die roll into more of a skill-based mechanic. Perhaps Tiburon could implement a long snap meter to go along with the existing kick meters. I'm imagining the kick power meter being wrapped around a circular long snapping meter. The user would press the snap ball button to start the meter, which takes the form of a glowing circle that shrinks towards the middle of the meter. When the shrinking circle gets near the center, you press the snap ball button again to lock in the accuracy of the snap, or else the meter snaps back out towards the edges, all very similar to how the kick meter works. Pressing the button too early or too late would result in a larger circle in the meter, which would translate to a larger area of inaccuracy. Similar in concept to the crosshairs of a first-person shooter that expand if the character is moving a lot, which increases the spread of any bullets fired. Starting the meter would cause an animation of the guard to pat the center's leg to denote that the holder or punter is ready to receive the snap, but the user could still hold the button at the end to delay the snap and possibly lure the defense offsides. If you hold the button too long, maybe there's even additional animations of the holder or punter clapping his hands or stomping his feet to demand that the ball be snapped. The long snapping rating for the long snapper would either affect the speed of the long snap meter or the size of the accuracy target area, or maybe both. An accurate snap would go straight to the holder or punter's chest, whereas a slightly inaccurate snap might be off-center, forcing the holder or punter to have to reach to pluck it out of the air, which might possibly disrupt the timing of the kick and make it possible for the kick to be blocked. An even more inaccurate snap would result in the ball bouncing off the turf at the holder or punter's feet, or possibly flying over his head. This would blow up the play entirely and force a mad scramble to recover the ball. Maybe there could be an optional additional input that determines whether the holder or punter actually catches the snap. Even if the snap itself is accurate, mistiming this second input could lead to the holder or punter bobbling the snap and screwing up the timing of the kick, or, worse yet, outright muffing the snap and fumbling it. This would mimic a QB's pass being accurate, but the receiver dropping the catch due to an incorrect input from the player or the receiver having poor catch rating. A slightly inaccurate snap and or hold could possibly result in the ball not being optimally positioned for the kick.
I mean, it's clear to me that it was a good hold. Finkel just booted it.
The laces were in! They were in!
The kicker would still get the kick off, but it might be less accurate due to a poor hold. There could maybe also be an opportunity for the user to press a button or a prompt to trigger a fire call that abandons the kick attempt and converts a field goal or PAT into an impromptu conversion attempt. You know, the infamous Tony Romo hold. And then maybe the kick meter itself could be moved to after the snap of the ball, which would force the user to have to make the kick during the play instead of being able to line everything up before the ball is even snapped. Or you aim the kick before the snap, but maybe you have to hold it through the snap and the charging of the kick power meter. This could potentially make kicking the ball far more challenging and less automatic. Perhaps maximizing the power and or accuracy of the kick even takes a split second longer, which would also increase the risk of the defense blocking the kick if they get a good jump off the snap. All this would combine with each other to turn blocked kicks into a more dynamic, user-driven event, rather than being some arbitrarily scripted animation that is completely outside the user's control. And of course, if we're going to be adding any additional steps to the kick meter, it would also help if Tiburon would fix some of the performance and lag issues that currently exist on the kicking meters. But I don't know, maybe this is all just needlessly complicated. Maybe a long snapping meter is complete overkill and we can just get by with the success or failure of long snaps being up to relevant ratings and a die roll. I personally am okay with that. But for those of you who aren't okay with that, this is my idea for how to appease users like you who don't want games being decided by supposed RNG flukes, even, like I said, ones that are based on player skill ratings. Or maybe the whole thing can be simplified by keeping the kick meter exactly as it currently is. Then, if you miss the kick, the long snapper's rating would then pseudo-randomly determine if the kick was missed because the kicker just shanked the kick, or because the long snapper botched the snap, leading to a fumble instead of a missed kick. This way, botched snaps are still user-driven events, but we don't have the extra complication of all those extra meters. Maybe there's a better way to achieve the same outcome and still keep the outcome of the play all up to player skills. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions, so if you think you have a better idea, by all means, let's hear it in the comments. I may have focused specifically on long snappers in this video, but similar logic and arguments can also be applied to make the case for other special teams positions that Madden currently does not include in its depth charts. If we're going to make long snappers into a meaningful specialist position, then why not also add depth chart slots for dedicated field goal holders, or for kick and punt coverage gunners? The Maximum Football games, rest in peace, allowed you to set these positions on depth charts, so why doesn't Madden do that? Maybe even add alternate field goal packages that bring in a reserve QB as a holder in case you want to try to be sneaky and run a fake. In general, every specialist position that is added to the game and which has potential risk and reward depending on the quality of the player in that position improves the strategic depth of the game's franchise mode or dynasty mode or whatever. It gives the user more to think about at the bottom of the depth chart instead of just at the top of the depth chart, because each specialist that you keep on your roster is one more reserve player that needs to be cut or stashed away on the practice squad. Is that Steve Tasker-like player worth keeping on your roster as an elite playmaker on special teams, even if he's a relatively low-rated receiver? You can also use these depth chart positions to help protect other starters from becoming injured. One of my pet peeves in Madden is when I see my starting middle linebacker or safety playing kickoff coverage. Not only does it open the player up to potential injury, but it also means he starts the following drive already having some fatigue. Like it or not, special teams is an important part of football. Yeah, both the NFL and NCAA have floated the idea of removing kickoffs and punts from the game in the name of player safety, but so far, neither league has gone that far, opting instead to experiment with ways to try to make those plays safer. Personally, I think all football leagues should take a close look at how the XFL handled its kickoffs, as I think that's a potential long-term solution to the problem. In any case, it doesn't look like kickoffs and punts are going anywhere anytime soon, and with the NFL having had some success with moving the extra point back to make the kick harder, I don't think field goals or extra points will be disappearing from the NFL anytime soon either. If Madden or any other football video game wants to say that it is simulation football, then it needs to simulate special teams too, and that includes having a meaningful role for a long snapper.